And hello, I am Liz Morales, Housing and Community Development Director for the City of Tucson. I want to welcome all of you and want to thank you in advance for your participation and thoughtful comments. As you know, Mayor and Council has voiced their concerns about the housing crisis. We've been watching rising rents, home prices, the loss of income that many experienced through the pandemic, and the need for more units for our residents that is affordable to them. As a result of the Mayor and Council's concerns, they tasked our department to develop a comprehensive plan around how we can increase and preserve affordable units in Tucson, to identify actionable goals and the funding that will help us to meet those goals. We have titled this effort the Housing Affordability Plan for Tucson. Many of you will remember the process we held last year to develop the People, Communities, and Housing Investment Plan, which we refer to as PCHIP. We identified overarching goals to address the various social needs of our community, which also included increasing affordable housing. The current effort to develop the Housing Affordability Plan for Tucson builds on the foundation of PCHIP, and it will be our roadmap to achieving equitable housing and increased units for persons at all income levels, but especially for those who are low income and vulnerable. I want to thank Ann Chineka, Deputy Director for Housing and Community Development, and her team who have been working tirelessly on this effort and to ensure we have input from all who care about this issue. You are here today, which demonstrates that you care for the future of Tucson. Thank you for your valuable time and input. Before we start, a couple housekeeping items. For those of you who missed Rachel's introduction, in the chat, you will find a form that is for you to sign in so we know who attended this session and ensure we continue to communicate with you in the coming days. We will also be asking you to complete a survey while we are talking throughout the presentations. We will be able to show those results in real time, so please be ready to respond to the surveys. Before we get into the actual presentation, I first want to invite and ask Danny Evanson with Align Finance Partners to share a brief presentation. I had an opportunity to meet with this company who provides financing of affordable housing and is now offering it to the Arizona market. I thought this would be a great opportunity to showcase and ensure our development partners are made aware of their products. Danny? If Danny's not here, Jane, do you want to speak? Jane, I see you put yourself off of mute. Are you there?
Oh, sorry. This is Danny Evanson.
Oh, this is
Align Finance.
Got it.
Yeah. Sorry, I was having some technical difficulties this morning, so I'm back using my phone instead of my computer. I apologize for the angle.
No problem.
But thank you for having us. My name is Danny Evanson. I'm with Align Finance Partners. I appreciate the opportunity to introduce myself and my company. We are dedicated to affordable housing. We are a tax-exempt finance fund and balance sheet lender, a national lender dedicated to providing capital across different types of affordable housing throughout the U.S. One of the key ingredients that I think that differentiates us from a capital source is our mission-driven capital to really dedicate to a spectrum of opportunity. And what I mean by that are properties and opportunities that result from 100% affordable to as low as 20% unit count affordable. One of the things that I think I'd like to just spend a couple minutes talking about are the two kind of basic profiles that I think would be beneficial to Tucson and the folks on the call today. Let's start with what we call a 100% affordable transaction that would qualify for 4% tax credits. So this is in the LIHTC world for those that are familiar with it. This is for new construction or even significant rehabilitation. And this is whereby 90% of the units are set aside for under 80% AMI, that's area median income. And they receive from a local issuer a tax, would be private activity bonds, which then allows for lenders like myself to provide tax exempt financing for the project. I would like to also say that we are very excited about working with Tucson and groups within the Tucson market, and that even extend beyond Tucson into Arizona. We recognize the need and the very low supply of affordable housing to the metros in Arizona. The second product that we have that I want to just briefly mention, all of which it can be found on our website at alignfinance.com. Our bios are there, our website's there, our term sheets and our product sheets are there as well. So for any details related to the products themselves, you can go to alignfinance.com. Another unique product I just want to briefly mention are for nonprofits that are dedicated to affordable housing. So that's going to be affordable housing operators, developers with a tax exempt nonprofit status. We have up to 100% financing for those projects. So essentially what we're trying to do is advocate and really try to help these nonprofits grow portfolios and create the continuation of their mission. In those projects that are owned and operated by 501c3s, the rent restrictions and the unit set aside, I'll briefly mention, there's two levels. You can either meet the criteria under a unit count of 20% at 50% AMI, 55% at 80% AMI, and then the rest 25% being at market. Now that's really what that allows for, is a nonprofit to potentially acquire a market rate project and then acquire it, overlay a deed restriction with those rent restrictions, what we call as a naturally affordable property that's going to be deed restricted and in perpetuity be affordable for the next 15 years. All these things that we have, these creative products, again, really structure
My
under
speaker's
one
not
goal.
working.
Okay, a more technical difficulty. I'm so sorry. Let me see.
Katie, I can hear you okay.
Okay, sorry about that.
We can hear.
Okay, fantastic. So again, without getting into too much of the granular detail behind what qualifies and the requirements associated with each of Align Finance products, I open myself up to getting called, emailed, go to our website, and allow us to walk you through the different opportunities. But essentially, we provide very high leverage, 90% to 100%, for properties and communities that qualify for affordable housing. And I think that's the message I really want to make sure I get out to all of you today. We're here to find a way for our capital to create more supply of affordable housing in Arizona, in Tucson, and around the country. And I'd love to talk to anybody who has additional questions or looking to connect. So thank you for the time today.
Thank you, Danny. And I believe Liz just put your contact information in the chat for those that were asking.
Great.
But we appreciate you presenting today. So I want to reiterate what Liz said in terms of thanking people for participating. I know you're all really busy. I know that I know myself personally for the last almost 2 years now have been asking you all for input on how to make affordable housing easier in Tucson. So I acknowledge that we continue to ask these questions, and really hoping now is an opportunity to share what I've been compiling the last couple of years and kind of truth check that today. And so we're going to share. So the first part here, I am going to go through what we've compiled. And then we will, as Liz mentioned, there will be a couple surveys, hoping in real time to be able to engage and interact with everyone. And then we will do breakout rooms as we really want to give people an opportunity to dive deeper into some of the issues that we're talking about. I want to thank the team that's been working on this in terms of the HCD stuff. I also really want to thank Corin Manning and Dan Bursick, who are helping out today, specifically with the, given that this is more focused on development. And so you'll hear from Corin today, and they'll be part of the breakout rooms as well. So all of that said, I'm going to launch into a presentation, but there will be some opportunity to interact during this. So you can see my screens okay. The couple disclaimers. This is very much a draft. So please know as I go through this today, this is something we've been working on and really want to hear input, and really curious as we go along. Please know that open to input, and it's still a work in progress. So I also want to mention that the title here, Housing Affordability Strategy for Tucson. As Liz mentioned, the way we are viewing this is really thinking about supporting the preservation and construction of housing units. HCD focuses primarily on low-income, affordable housing, and we realize that the housing crisis, and we'll go into more on that today, is something that's impacting all Tucsonans. The more housing units we can bring on the market and make sure that we keep what's existing on the market, it's going to help everybody. So with that, we are planning on getting this online in the next couple of days. And so you'll be able to go through this yourself and offer additional input after today. Please know that. Right now, the draft that we have has 5 sections, and you can see those at the top. So there'll be an introduction section, there'll be a summary of data, there's a policy initiatives and action section, a funding overview in terms of what the city receives when it comes to funding for affordable housing. And then eventually we will be building out short-term action plans on all of the short-term goals that we've identified. As Liz mentioned, this plan came from a direct motion from Mayor and Council to really focus on a plan that can be actionable and that Mayor and Council can take action on sooner than later. And so that's really the emphasis that we're looking at. So in terms of an introduction section, we will be talking about why this is called the Housing Affordability Strategy, and really thinking about what is housing affordability, making sure that an individual or a family can pay for housing and still have enough left over to cover other necessities such as food, transportation, and healthcare. This slide here in the introduction, we will be talking about some of the definitions and what we call. Many of you know I come from the transportation world, and I thought transportation had a lot of acronyms and jargon, and lo and behold, HUD has way more of all of that. So housing and urban development there. And so we will be defining what the city means when we talk about some of these types of housing, like mixed income housing, multi-use development. These are terms that I hear people using, and some people have been using them differently. And so we will have a definition section, and we do plan on having a glossary of terms. Liz presented this image in August to Mayor and Council, and we got a lot of feedback that it was really helpful in thinking about how the service needs in our community when it comes to housing. And one thing really wanted to point out is, the city does have initiatives focusing on the left side of this housing continuum in terms of helping the unhoused. We listed a few here. Mayor and Council have adopted a housing first approach in terms of really trying to make sure somebody has a roof over their head as kind of the first step towards stability. We are in process of purchasing hotels to add in some more transitional housing options. And then we will continue and have been in a collaboration with the county, supporting current shelters in terms of rehabilitating and offering some energy efficiency. We'll continue to do that. That's in collaboration with Tucson Pima Collaboration to End Homelessness, who has a lot of plans specifically for helping address those issues. This plan is not that. This plan is everything to the right of that. And so really the purpose of this plan is supporting the preservation and construction of housing units for permanent housing options. The data section, I will say many of you are aware the city's been doing a deep dive into housing data the last couple of years. This plan will summarize that. We partnered with the University of Arizona in Pima County on a comprehensive market study. And Rachel, when you get a chance, can you add a link to that in the chat? So that was a map dashboard project with University of Arizona in which there's a ton of data related to housing. The city's also, thanks to Laura, who created the story map. We have the Poverty and Urban Stress website that has a ton of data on jobs and incomes and poverty rates across Tucson, all data that's related to housing. And then when we did the People, Communities, and Homes investment plan, we also had a chapter dedicated to challenges that went into a lot of information on data. So here, we're just going to summarize the high points. And I don't think this will be a surprise to anyone on this call. The basic gist of the data we're showing is we need more housing. And so to summarize that briefly, we know here that population has been increasing. Where we are, we're trying to add Pima County data. We haven't, there's not all of the data sets have it yet, but we are working on that. And then the housing production, for the most part, was keeping up with that population growth. But since the Great Recession, there's been a slowdown and we still haven't recovered. We feel like that's something that is contributing to the current housing crunch we're in. And then a specific issue in Tucson related to affording housing is our low incomes across Tucson. And so there are a couple charts, and again, we plan on getting the story map up in the next day to 2 days. So I wanted to show you here that in some cases there's multi-tabs on the data. So here is a chart Liz mentioned and Danny mentioned in talking about the products, the area median income. And HUD uses these categories to describe that. And then we give a sense of what that is for Tucson. And then this tab shows the percent of cost burdened per different income category. And so another way to show this data, this shows that for renter, I'm going to come over to the right side. For renter households, there are about 25,000 households that are in the extremely low income category, and 20,000 of those are shown as housing cost burdened. So low incomes in Tucson correlates to high poverty rates. Again, not a surprise to all of you on this call, but we know that Tucson's poverty rates are higher than Pima County and are quite high, even are higher than Arizona as a whole. And then this chart I do want to stop on for a second. We recently updated this chart, and please know when it comes to housing data, we know that no housing data source is perfect. For rent, we've been using apartment list, and for typical home values, we've been using Zillow. We know there's shortcomings with that, but that's the best data that we're aware of to give us current information. And so in terms of rent, I think that this is pretty striking. In 2017, across the 12 months, the annual estimated median rent was $860. Please know that's across all sizes of units, from studios up to 4 bedrooms. And we do break that down a little more on a future chart. But today, that is, the estimate is it's over $1,200. So a 40% increase in rent over the past 5 years. And then typical home values in 2017 in Tucson estimated at about 176,000, and today Zillow estimates it at around 287,000. And so when people ask me about why are you calling it a housing crisis, this is the data that we're pointing to. And I think it's important to show why what is it, why is this so important to talk about? And I think this really shows that this is the last 3 years. Incomes have only gone up by a few percentage increase, but the cost of rent and the home value of houses has gone up by quite a bit. And so in terms of us looking at this, this is why we are referring to this plan as a housing affordability strategy. It's something that much of Tucson and much of the region is experiencing at this point. And then this chart was from the housing market study, and it shows across a few of the common occupations in Tucson, you know, what can people afford based on the common occupations. So the first one is a good example. A part-time retail worker is making about $13,000 a year in Tucson. And in thinking about the housing cost burden and not paying more than 30%, based on that income, they could afford about a rent that's about $325 a month. But for a studio apartment in Tucson today, it's estimated that studios are going for $842 a month. And so that shows you the discrepancy between wages right now in Tucson and what costs are in Tucson. And then in thinking about supply, there are in some income categories, particularly the extremely low income category, we know that the number of households is far greater than the supply of affordable units. And so this is one way to see this chart. This is the gap analysis that was as part of the market study. It's the same data, just shown another way. This chart you can interact with, you can click on, and it will pop up information on number of households. And I've spent more time than I care to admit staring at this chart. And so a few takeaways that has helped me in terms of framing where we're at with housing and why housing at all income categories will be helpful. We know that there's not nearly enough units for the lowest income categories. And when you stare at this chart long enough, what you'll see is many of the higher earning households are taking units at those lower rents, creating even more of a crunch for lower earning households. And so we are looking at trying to support housing across the market. But of course, at Housing Community Development, our focus is more on affordable housing. In Tucson, this is Tucson, this is not Pima County, but we know that there's over as of a couple years ago, which is what the most recent data coming from HUD, we know that over 75,000 households are housing cost burden. And so really thinking about trying to find solutions for those 75,000 households. And then last thing to touch on the data, acknowledging that housing does have a racist legacy that you really see when you look at housing segregation maps of Tucson. So this, I think, is pretty pronounced when you see that there is a clear divide between Hispanic households in Tucson and non-Hispanic white households, according to census data in which people are answering those questions. And so I am going to stop there for a minute and ask a question. And please feel free to use the chat. I know there's a lot of people on this call, so we're not going to have time for everybody to share information. But I'm curious if you have any thoughts in terms of things we didn't include as part of the introduction and the data section, or anything that stood out to you as surprising in the data section and the intro section. So would love to hear from you, thoughts on those parts before we dive into the actions. And feel free to use the chat. And I know some of you are not shy, so feel free to jump on in.
Hi, this is Randy. I'll just say I was surprised at the where rents used to be in Tucson and how quickly they raised, and how incomes. I knew that there was disparity, but I did not fully understand the degree of the disparity. So thank you for highlighting that.
Thank you, Randy. And thank you for folks that are putting comments in the chat too. Anyone else have any thoughts in terms of, this is intended to be the summary of data, high level overview, but things that we may want to include, and I see Corky has raised his hand.
Yeah, just quickly, and I have no idea if there's any access to the information, but it has always struck me that the rents and costs in Tucson stayed low because it was mostly local capital, and struck me as the big change in the last 5 years as it's become extra Tucson capital coming into town. And I'm wondering if there's any data that supports that, because that seems to be at the heart of the changes that we're seeing. Thank you.
Thanks, Corky. Right.
I have one thing for you, Anne.
Okay, go for it, Ryan.
I saw the pie chart where you know, people's incomes are split into.
Tell me where you want the audio.
You can't hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. And it showed a car as everything else, but I would just, you know, emphasize the importance of transportation and housing choice with the whole drive to you qualify phenomena, and how housing plus transportation equates to like 30%, or sorry, 45% of people's household expenditure. And I included the Housing and Transportation Affordability Index website as a reference.
Thanks, Ryan. All right, we're going to jump into the next section, as it's really intended to be a summary of what we've been hearing in terms of actions that the city can take that will be helpful. And I'm going to ask both Liz and Corin to tag team this section with me, and also don't hesitate to continue to add comments in the chat. Okay. So this is the policy initiatives and action section. One thing I did want to mention, as Liz indicated with the People, Communities, and Homes investment plan, that planning effort that Mayor and Council adopted last year was really a roadmap for all of what housing and community development does. So the people part, really looking at education and incomes and jobs and healthcare and things that help individuals. And then the communities part is really thinking about neighborhoods and community networks. And so also thinking about the concerns with changing neighborhoods and gentrification and displacement. And then the home section was more specific to how do we ensure that people have a roof over their heads. As part of that planning effort, we identified 4 key priority areas when it comes to homes, and those 4 are shown on the screen on the left. 1 is to increase affordable rental housing, which includes preservation. 2 is to expand affordable home ownership. 3 is to ensure stable, healthy, and safe housing. And 4 is to increase equitable housing. So we spent a lot of time, we asked you for a lot of input on that. We created goals within those categories and identified strategies to meet those goals. I will say this plan is going to go into more detail on that and specifically focus on actions the city can take sooner than later. And so the purpose, as we've been talking about, of this plan is really focused on the preservation and construction of housing units. That said, we did identify a few pillars keeping in mind that we kept in mind in thinking about the initiatives. HCD does focus on residents most vulnerable to housing instability. And then we really do want to make sure the policy initiatives align with other key city initiatives. So specifically the climate resiliency work, advancing racial and social equity, and supporting older adults. So that's the caveat going into the policy initiatives. We have identified 10 policy initiatives. really trying to do a manageable number and focus on what we think we can achieve sooner than later. Each of the policy initiatives has some specific actions that are divided into short-term, medium-term, and ongoing actions. And by short-term, by that we're meaning in the next 1 to 2 years. Medium-term, we're thinking 2 to 5 years, and then ongoing are things that we see as happening continuously. And so we're going to talk through the 10 initiatives briefly, and then there will be some time for engagement and interaction with this. So I'm going to ask Liz to jump in here.
So the first item is around our public housing. We have over 1,500 units. We just did a needs assessment, and the numbers are staggering. I was about to pull my numbers here as to what that number is. But in order to really address the needs that we have in public housing, we started receiving technical assistance from HUD to look at other funding platforms that HUD offers for public housing. So moving it from public housing into a Section 8 platform, we would continue to own the units if we were to do some of these options, such as the rental assistance demonstration, which is called RAD. So we would look at maybe 245 units. Also, Tucson House would fall under the choice, looking at doing a RAD conversion there. But then there's other units that we are looking at potentially going under the demolition disposition, not demolishing them, but maybe selling them, using them for home ownership, and looking at a phased approach to doing that. So we know that this is the direction we need to go in, and the short-term goal around that is to develop this plan to increase the units. We do have an opportunity to do what they call some 2-for-1. So as we convert or move or sell these units for home ownership, we could also move that subsidy over to a new development, and really looking for more sustainable funding to be able to ensure that these units are maintained and over a long period of time, ensure we have long-term affordability of these units. So this is a pretty big focus for us. It's going to take a lot of effort, and it will take time, but this is one of our first initiatives. Second is around building capacity around in Tucson around affordable housing development. Many of you have been watching over the last couple of years where mayor and council is saying, what more can we do? If you look at public housing authorities throughout the country, many and most of the larger ones have developed considerable amount of housing in addition to what other developers and nonprofits are doing. So we're not seeing ourselves as competing with other developers, but actually just being a part of the work that the developers are doing to increase affordable housing. We see doing this in conjunction with developers as a co-developer role, but we will need to develop an arm, whether it's a nonprofit or individual entities for each project as we go on. We also, part of this goal is to support our community partners, our developers that are doing this work through our funding that we get, whether it's home or through project-based voucher program, the Section 8 project-based voucher program. So the second initiative is really about doing more of this, both for the city, on behalf of the city, and also in conjunction with our partners.
And Liz, to piggyback off of that last comment about supporting community partners, we're looking at trying to help support capacity for some of the smaller incremental development and also the larger scale. And we'll be curious to hear from you all what you think that might look like. And in terms of, as Liz just mentioned, our home funding and the resources we do have to support development, we are looking to try to provide more consistency in terms of putting out an annual application for the funding we do receive, and we'll talk about that a little more as we go. But just wanted to mention, similar to what Phoenix does, we are looking to to be on an annual cycle that where there will be an application process for that funding.
Number 3, I think, Anne, you were going to take this one, but this is really about prioritizing affordable housing in areas of opportunity.
Yeah, so in thinking about equitable housing and really trying to advance opportunities, the city is in process of creating a checklist, and that will quantify siting locations. So on the left is a graphic that shows some of the things that go into the checklist in terms of thinking about ideal locations for affordable housing. So, you know, as Ryan mentioned, out access to transportation and not necessarily needing a car. So projects that are close to the high frequency bus network will score higher than projects that for that category that would be farther from public transportation. For access to community centers, parks, grocery stores, for transit oriented development projects, ones that have higher density zoning. And then so we are in process. That will be one piece of information. We're in process of creating that now. And then also in thinking about our application process, we will be looking at prioritizing projects that focus on more vulnerable populations that we know are vulnerable to housing instability, and really trying to prioritize projects with longer affordability periods, lower affordability limits. And so we're still in process of creating that, and we will be working closely with our Commission on Equitable Housing and Development, and there is a affordable housing subcommittee to that group that as we develop these tools and work on, we will be working closely with that commission. And that will be one piece of information that informs city investment in projects. And then Liz, did you want to talk about the medium term one?
Yes, so the medium term one is actually something that's been done in many communities across the country. It's around creating under the protected classes of fair housing, a local ordinance, which would provide a protection for source of income. So often if individuals have some type of subsidy or other source of income, landlords have the ability to decline or reject the application. So by creating this source of income protection, it could allow tenants to have more access to units and more opportunities, and landlords would be required to under this ordinance to accept those type of income sources. So I love this picture. I want to live in this house. Expanding the fourth item, expanding efforts to preserve and enhance existing housing. I want to congratulate all of you, many of you that are on this call, including our planning and development department around accessory dwelling unit ordinance, which is called the Casita ordinance. We are looking at launching an improvement program, which would provide repair and rehabilitation of units to get them into compliance. And also looking at developing and expanding a manufactured housing rehabilitation program that would, again, provide more opportunities for our residents, more housing options. Medium term is around possibly using our home funds to do a multifamily rental rehab program, which would allow us to have requirements that those units would accept various types of subsidies or low income families. And so that would allow us to have more options. And then ongoing, we are very grateful for our partners at Arizona Department of Housing. They oversee the low income housing tax credit program. And part of that is units are coming in the near future to reaching their affordability period. And they've offered to help us identify those and ensure that we are doing everything we can to keep those units affordable rather than letting them go offline. So that's an ongoing effort. and I will bat this back.
All right, and I'm going to ask Corin to jump in here.
Sure, happy to. Hi, everyone. I'm Corin Manning with Planning and Development Services. And we work really closely with Housing and Community Development on this plan and a lot of other initiatives, so that we're working hand in hand on a lot of different aspects that support housing affordability in Tucson. So we know that zoning is one of the challenges in some cases for the production of affordable housing in Tucson. So we want to hear from you on what zoning changes and other code changes would make it easier to build affordable housing in Tucson, both subsidized affordable housing as well as bringing more market rate housing to our market that meets the needs of our incomes and our demographics in Tucson. So some of the shorter term strategies are incorporating incentives into planning and zoning for overlays on our transit corridors. And a recent example of this is the Sunshine Mile overlay, which many of you in this meeting were very involved in and even led those efforts. And that we really see as a new template for how we want to approach transit corridors in Tucson. So the Broadway corridor, there's actually planning underway now to establish bus rapid transit, and it's an existing transit corridor. And through the new overlay that was adopted by Mayor and Council this year, there's an incentive for affordable housing. So projects that include affordable housing will get a density bonus. And we're also looking at funding strategies to bring that affordable housing to the corridor. So that's going to be an approach we take as we look at other transit corridors like Oracle, like South 6, like other corridors across the city. We want to build on that model. Another strategy is to promote high quality, climate adapted and attractive design of new housing. This applies to both affordable housing, subsidized affordable, as well as our market rate housing. We're really looking at strategies to allow more climate adapted development. And we really think that, as Anne mentioned earlier, our climate strategies as a city and our housing strategies are very interlinked. So we're looking at ways to promote more sustainable infill, more innovative or different housing types. So this could be things like bungalow courts, duplexes, townhouses. You know, we're hearing a lot about missing middle housing types. That supports infill, use of our infrastructure and transit system, and can be more affordable housing options. So we're looking at potential zoning changes to allow more diverse housing options in our community. And then kind of longer term and on an ongoing basis, we're looking at how to update development standards and create other zoning tools to incentivize affordable housing. This could be things like lower parking requirements for affordable housing, other types of zoning relief for affordable housing, like reduced setbacks, other site options, or potentially additional height and density for affordable housing projects. So those are some of the things we're looking at as ways to encourage affordable housing through zoning.
Thanks, Corin. And I'm going to have you jump in at least on the first part of this as well.
Mm-hmm. So we know that besides zoning, there's other pieces of the development process where we can look at strategies to facilitate more affordable housing development. So we're looking at ways to streamline the development review process for affordable housing projects potentially, and expanding the affordable housing impact fee program to include a wider range of affordable housing developers. We mentioned ADUs before. Liz mentioned accessory dwelling units or casitas. So we're looking at other ways to incentivize ADU construction. We've currently launched a pilot, or hope to be launching a pilot program for ADU repairs, but we want to look at other ways to incentivize construction through model plans and potentially other financing sources to help with affordable ADU development. And longer term, we are looking at other ways to allow modular housing prefab 3D printed homes. And Anna, I don't know if you want to say more about that.
I'll just say that picture there is Arizona's first 3D printed home up in Tempe, and we're keeping our eyes on that, seeing how it goes, and something we'd be interested in seeing if we can bring here. And so thank you, Corin. I'll say the conversations I've had with you all, with people that work in this field day in and day out, have been really focused on 5 and 6 in terms of an awareness that the affordable housing often does not pay for itself when you're creating these. And so I know many of you have been asking for ways the city can better support your projects. So thinking back here about updating zoning and development standards and facilitating development by reducing costs, we did actually put together, and I'm gonna launch a poll now. We want to hear a little more specifically from you all in terms of what your thoughts are regarding those. And so we have a poll that I'm asking if Jeremiah can put a link in the chat. It is a Microsoft Forms. I know that maybe not everybody will be able to do this, but if you can click on that link that Jeremiah Dean just put in the chat, it will take you to a poll question. And oops, sorry, Jeremiah, wrong one. Do you mind doing the second one? Sorry, pause. This is that is going to be another poll question. You're getting a sneak preview, but this one I do want specifically on those 2 items that Corin just talked about. Okay, so the second link is the one, it's the second link there in the chat. The poll is called Ability to Build and Preserve Affordable Housing, and it's really focused on those items that Corin just went over. And so, for instance, the first item that we're asking, what if parking restrictions, if that's something the city could tackle, how helpful would that be towards supporting your affordable housing developments? So please take a few minutes. I know this will take a little bit of time, but just really want to hear from you on those items.
And you're muted.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Jeremiah, for sharing your screen. It's something that we'll keep up for a bit, but we do want more specific information, and we will be doing breakouts that go into more detail on these specific items. But feel free to keep answering, and we're going to move on, though. We have a few more policy initiatives before we break into smaller groups. And so, Jeremiah, you can stop sharing your screen. And I will say I am paying attention. Thank you for folks that have been asking questions in the chat. We're not ignoring them. If we have time, we'll get to them. But one thing I will commit to do is doing a question response that we'll post to the plan website after this. And so, wait. All right. So 7, I'll jump in on, and Liz, feel free to jump in as well. But one of the policy initiatives, we've heard loud and clear that city has land across the city, and people have asked that we do prioritize it for affordable and mixed income housing. And so right now we are in process of developing a phased plan based on sites we know are in a good spot for development. We're also, based on the work that was just done on Broadway and Sunshine Mile, there are a few remnant parcels the city owns that we are doing a feasibility study to see if we can get in affordable housing projects on those sites. The city is also looking to acquire new properties based on all of those goals we talked about before, so that the city can be a partner in development. And then many of you have been hearing us talk about trying to advance 4 particular parcels that we have been working on. 3 of them are in Ward 1 and 1 of them is in Ward 3. Those are projects we're actively working on right now, trying to move forward. We do plan on, there will be co-development opportunities for some of those sites that we will be looking to put an RFP out early next year on. And then Liz, I'm gonna tag this over to you.
All right, I will just, for a quick response on just one question, when I was talking about the public housing, the 1,500 units, we did a 20-year needs assessment, which totaled $48 million would be needed to update our housing stock. So it's a pretty significant need if we don't do anything different. So jumping on this item, enhancing the efforts for the most vulnerable. So looking at short term is we're looking at supporting Emerge, which provides services to individuals fleeing domestic violence. So we are going to, in the short term, help through funding of our home ARPA. ARPA meaning the American Rescue Plan, to help them develop more non-congregate shelter units. Also, the work of the Affordable Housing Alliance, which is around housing for older adults and supporting the work that's happening right now around that. And then also around the small scale development for youth and older adults. Mayor and council did put out funding, which we'll be talking about shortly, but it will, some of that will be dedicated to supporting developers who want to do small scale housing. On the medium term, really looking at our Tucson house, and we say medium, we'd like to do it tomorrow, but we know it's going to take some effort to do this. And so that's one of our goals that we need to get done. And then ongoing, really looking at supporting new permanent supportive housing projects. I know, David, you talked about around still promoting family housing. We are definitely still supportive of development for family housing, but also including a component to ensure that we have permanent supportive housing also being developed. Pursuing funding streams. This is a real challenge for all of us as we look at how to do more development. It's sometimes limited, competitive, and so we are trying to see how we can, on a local level, support that work. We have technically a housing trust fund for the city of Tucson. We just don't have a dedicated funding stream. So the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development, that's one of their efforts, is they want to help look at what are some additional funding streams that can be brought to Tucson. Also, medium term is looking at, is it possible to look at adding housing as a future bond election? Again, this is very political. This is something mayor and council would need to look at, but it is something that I think the commission, again, is looking at how to recommend that to mayor and council. And ongoing, as we continue to advocate for more state and federal funding for housing. I will say this past week, or was it this past week? We had a great advocate and one of our commission members and Tucson House resident, Mike Edmonds, who spoke to the Financial Services Committee and at Congress. So again, how do we get the word out that we need more housing, and hopefully, you know, holding on to some hope that maybe they will include it in the Build Back Better Act and that it actually gets passed. So those are some efforts currently happening. Finally, our last goal is really important around education and outreach efforts to the broader community. Short-term, Mayor and Council, one of the funding is around housing resource connections. How do we get people to navigate housing and as anyone who's ever tried, it's a very difficult thing to do. So we're hoping to bring on and fund an agency to help us with this piece. Ongoing, we know that there's a lot of education that needs to be happening. From my perspective, the Housing Choice Voucher Program has a really negative connotation to many neighbors, residents, and landlords. And so helping to put a different light on that, and so that people will be more accepting, as well as making sure people know that there is a program through the county, a property tax reduction program for those who are low income and other exemption opportunities. And then just about around our other housing programs. So making sure we have a way for people to know what's available, whether it's homeowner rehab or any of the other programs that will be coming online.
Okay.
And I forgot to say, we did the video, the picture there is one of our current landlords, and he does a great job, and hopefully we'll have that out so people can see why landlords should work with our programs.
All right, so those were the 10 policy initiatives. Before we break out into smaller groups to hear more and let you all give us more input on those, I did want to provide an overview of our funding sources and talk a little bit about some of the opportunities that Liz mentioned. In terms of having a section dedicated to funding that we received to support affordable housing, that was part of the motion that Mayor and Council asked us to include. And so to start out this section, I did just want to root it in, and I'm open to feedback and thoughts on this, but I realize it's really hard to give a cost estimate per unit to build or preserve. That cost varies wildly in terms of what you're building and where you're building it. But just to provide some context, we do want to put an estimate in this plan, but really open to thoughts and feedback on that. The estimate that we had, thanks to folks that know what they're doing with development, is that in the past couple of years, it's risen incredibly. And so 300,000-ish per door is the current estimate that we have. And again, I'm open to feedback on that. But so the caveats there, we know that that really varies depending on what people are building or preserving, and that we know that the costs are changing rapidly. And so please know we acknowledge that. So going to go through really quickly what we do receive and what funding may be available in the short term. So this summarizes in an annual basis what we receive overall from HUD. And so you'll see that the bulk of the money we get is for the Housing Choice Voucher Section 8 program. And so the one thing I want to say about this funding is this is what the city receives. However, most of that funding is committed to supporting our HUD assisted residences. So as Liz mentioned, the city has over 1,500 public housing units. We have about 500 additional units. And so right now we have over 17,000 residents that we are supporting. And the average income of those 17,000 plus residents is just a little over $11,000. And so most of the money we receive goes to supporting those specific residents. One more just showing what the demographic breakdown of those residents currently is. That said, so based on all of that, this is the funding that we do anticipate on an annual basis, at least for the next 5 years. We have, and so each year we get the city's portion. As you know, we work closely with the county, but the city's portion of home funding is about 2.5 million each year. Some of that goes to our programs such as down payment assistance and tenant-based rental assistance. So what we feel like we have each year is 370,000 needs to be dedicated to a community housing development organization. And then we have approximately 1.5 million each year. And so starting in, we have committed our home funding for the next year, but starting next fall, we do plan on putting out an application process for that funding that will align with the state QAP, similar to what Phoenix does. The other thing, and Liz, feel free to jump in, is that we are looking at our project-based vouchers, and the current thinking is we'll be putting about 50 out a year for the next 5 years as part of that application process. And Liz, do you want to jump in here? And you are on mute right now.
I do. And one of the things I want to mention is that the current QAP is looking for contribution from the city that the project is in. And they're looking for financial. So I want to make sure that for our developers that are submitting for the competitive 9%, that we are making sure we give them the most points that they could potentially have. So that is why we're building that in. And also, again, to show our commitment for the long-term work that the developers do, that knowing that project-based vouchers is one of those ways to make sure a project is viable, as well as our home fund. So just wanted to say that this is really around making sure we bring as many projects to Tucson from the low-income housing tax credit program.
And we're going to get to the ARPA funding next, but I will say you can see this isn't a ton of money to support development. And so back to the policy initiative about trying to think about growing the pie when it comes to housing resources. I think this really shows that based on how much units cost and what we receive each year to support projects, it's not that much. That said, there's some good news in terms of what we're currently doing. So this is the ARPA funding, the rescue plan funding that's restricted specifically for housing. So the emergency rental assistance is what's going out now in terms of rent and utility assistance and the emergency housing vouchers, but did want to mention that middle category there, the home ARPA funding. The city is receiving money to support housing, mostly for persons experiencing homelessness. We are looking at putting out, as part of an application process, probably supporting one project in the short term, since we had already committed our home funding. And so we are looking at doing an application process with home ARPA to support a project that meets the criteria of the home ARPA, together with our project-based vouchers. And we're looking at getting that application out probably in January, again, to hopefully align with the QAP. And then last but not least, the last slide is focused on the state and local fiscal recovery. That's what SLRFF stands for, state local fiscal recovery. This is additional funding Mayor and Council just committed to promoting affordable and stable housing. And so I'm going to let Liz jump in and talk about this.
Yes, so as these funds have been, these activities have been identified, we are currently working on what a funding process that should be rolled out. We're looking at going live November 5th is the tentative date, so please don't hold me to that. We are talking about having informational sessions November 8th, 9th, and 10th, which will, and it's not just these activities, there's other funding activities to do things like workforce development and other type parks and rec type things. So this effort, we do not have any details on it today. So just stand by as we look at how this will be rolled out. Again, it's going to be happening very soon. So keep your eyes open. We will make sure that through our process of notification, through our newsletters, that people will know and hear from us when this is available for you to look at and apply. The application turnaround will be very short. So it's very important that you stay informed on this. So if you're interested in these funding sources, that you have as much time to see it and respond to it.
And so I know that was a lot of information, and we do want to give some time to hear from you all. And so at this point, my recommendation is we're going to break out into smaller groups, and there are more specific questions, and that will give you time to react to what you just saw. Again, we'll be posting this presentation to also give you more time. I will ask Rachel to put my email address in the chat. Please know I am always available in terms of feel free to email me and with additional questions after today. But I'm also going to ask Rachel to break us out into smaller groups. There will be a staff member from the city in each of the groups to help facilitate the conversation.
Awesome. I'm going to open the breakout rooms now.
All right. Looks like we have most people back. I'm guessing I jumped around to a few different groups and definitely heard great conversations and probably wish there was more time for that. In terms of wrapping up, I do want to be mindful of time. I know we threw a lot out at you. I see this as the beginning of this conversation when it comes to the housing affordability plan. We will be updating you all as the plan moves on. We have a public meeting today focused on the plan, and then and that one's virtual, and then tomorrow's in person, trying to offer different formats for folks depending on their preference and comfort level. Those two sessions will be the same, so please know when you're sharing information with your networks that we're seeing this as whoever would prefer to be virtual or be in person. In terms of questions, we will send out responses to those questions that we got in chat that we didn't have time for. In terms of as we refine the actions and policy initiatives, we will be building out section 5 of the plan is the action plans, which will break down the short-term actions and provide a little more detail on timeline and funding sources and thoughts. That section is intended to have the actions tied into the funding resources. So that's the plan for that section, but we'll continue to have this conversation. And Liz, did you want to say anything to wrap up as well?
Again, thank you. Don't, after today, things come to mind, please circle back with us. So thanks again, Anne.
Yeah. And I'll say, having the opportunity to jump to a few different groups, really, really appreciative for the input that people were sharing in those groups, and the facilitators will be compiling that information and sending it to me, and we will really look to include that information as we move forward. And again, don't hesitate to reach out. Rachel put my email address in there in the chat, and yeah. Just a big, huge thank you to all of you for being here today.
Thank you.